Hello, everybody. I heartily welcome you to our joint session of Academy of Management and Academy of International Business. My name is Sibyl Sachs. I'm the moderator of this webinar, and I'm from the University of Applied Sciences in Zurich and also the co-chair of the Ethics Education Committee of the Academy. So before we start the program, I would like to introduce you our norms we are also following in this webinar. So as you can see here at the Academy, the Code of Conduct is very much aware that we are committed to maintaining a professional, inclusive, and respectful environment for all participants. We appreciate your cooperation in upholding these norms to ensure a constructive and respectful discussion also in this seminar. So please take a short time to see what we expect and what we wouldn't like to see. And if somebody is doing any of the prohibited conduct, we have to exclude this person. So during the talks, you are not seen, but you will have possibility to engage at the end. So what I want to do now next is to introduce you our wonderful panel we could compile. So the first person you see is Sharon Alvarez. Sharon Alvarez is the Academy of Management past president, associate dean, and distinguished professor of Thomas Olofsson Chair in Entrepreneurial Studies at the Graduate School of Business at the University of Pittsburgh. Professor Alvarez is also the past chair of the Entrepreneurial Division of the Academy of Management and was 2015 Denmark's program chair for the Strategic Management Society, as well as the representative at large for the SMS Entrepreneurship Interest Group. She's one of the most renowned scholars in entrepreneurship and won several Best Paper Awards. Sharon's cornerstone in her presidential year is ethics in the academy. So the second person is Linda Kleber-Trevino, distinguished professor of organizational behavior and ethics at Smead College of Business Administration, the Pennsylvania State University. Her research focuses on understanding ethical and unethical conduct in organizations, including ethical culture, ethical leadership, unethical leadership, ethical voice, and more. She's an elected member of the Academy of Management Fellows. Linda served on the Academy of Management's original ethics task force that created the Code of Ethics and served as the first ethics ombudsperson for the Academy of Management. Jennifer Eyre, the next person, is Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education and Clinical Associate Professor for Management and Organization, also at Smead College of Business, the Peninsula State University. She is also member of the Ethics Education Committee for the Academy of Management and serves on the editorial reviews board for Journal of Management Education and Management Teaching Review. In her research, she studied individuals and organizational responses to identity threat and organizational culture, specifically how culture can foster integrity and ethical behavior. The next person, Kathy Lundin, is at the Board of Trustees, Distinguished Chairs in Leadership and Ethics, Gustavo Adolphus College in Minnesota. Kathy's ethics research has covered ways COVID-impacted institutions can create resource and rebound, explored how new managers identified and resolve workplace ethical dilemmas, and demonstrated that experiential pedagogy carries inherent ethical considerations. For the joint AOM and IIB webinar, she discusses editorial ethical issues from her most recent book. Lauren Eden is Professor Emerita of Management and Adjunct Professor of Law at Texas. And ethics is her very important topic in research, service, and teaching. She wrote one of the first codes of ethics for a business journal. She also drafted the Academy of International Business 3 Ethics Code, including the first rule on procedure for AIB Ethics Review Committee and Ethics Policy Committee. As a member of the Academy of Management Ethics Education Committee, Eden, together with Kathy Lundin and Paul Wolfson, founded and co-wrote the OM Ethics blog, which later became the basis for their book together with Katie. So you see, we have very renowned people here and people who has really a strong connection to ethical organizational culture. I will hand over now to Sharon, who gives you some insight about why ethics in academy matters.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those people around the world. I, as Sybil mentioned, have the honor and the privilege of being the immediate past president of the Academy of Management. And this webinar is a cornerstone of some of what we're trying to accomplish this year. And I want to thank all the organizers. I think I have another slide where I get to thank them as well. But this dedicated, hardworking group of people that you will see here today, they do so much behind the scenes. They do so much work to keep us going and to keep our ethics and to keep our practice and our organizations supported in a way that the rest of us can do our work and know that ethics underlies everything that's going on, and that we have a very active group of people that are working on ethics and positive practices. So the sponsors of this webinar are the Academy of Management Ethics Education Committee, which I think I have another slide coming up, which I'll talk to you about in a second, and also the Academy of International Business Ethics Policy Committee, which is, again, a small group of AIB members who are responsible for implementation, interpretation, advice, communication, and review and updating of AIB's ethics codes. Again, these are committees that are embedded within different organizations, but all the organizations come together with a common ground of understanding as to what our ethics are. Thank you very much. So the Academy of Management Ethics Committees, we have within ethics, within the umbrella of ethics, we have 3 different branches, if you will. And I want to talk about the Ethics Education Committee. I have the privilege at the beginning of my term to be able to redesign and appoint new ethics chairs for that committee. And it really has been a privilege, and it has been amazing because the most amazing women, Rachel Belvin and Sybil Sachs, had agreed to co-chair this committee. And for those of you who go to Academy, you will realize how active and amazing they've been. Jennifer Schultz is our Ethics Ombuds Committee chair, and the Ombuds Committee is the initial point of contact for confidential ethics inquiries. And they do a lot of groundwork that nobody ever sees. They do a lot of the digging. And then we have the Ethics Adjudication Committee, and that is Marianne Glenn. And again, no one hears about this, right? Because the goal is to maintain confidentiality, and the goal is that people can come to us and they can talk to us, and we will maintain their confidentiality. So a lot of work goes on, but it sometimes never comes to the surface. Our next slide, please. The Academy of International Business Ethics Committee. Again, we have our Ethics Policy Committee, Chuck, who I think is here, Chuck Kwok, and the Ethics Review Committee, which is Dennis Arnold, who's the chair. They also have supported us today in this work that we're doing. Next slide. So why does ethics matter, and why does it matter so much to the Academy of Management, and why does it matter to me? And as I said, you know, I'm the immediate past president, but as I served during my term, I would pay attention to different things that were coming because I knew, you know, in 4 years I would be president. And I thought, you know, what's my signature initiative going to be? And I took notes and I would watch how things would evolve. And, you know, it was an incredible set of events that happened while I was on the executive committee, right? So we had COVID. We had multiple changes to publications. One, we had a conflict of interest code that everybody now signs. That came into place during this time period. And we also did something that's really important. Every article that gets published by the Academy of Management, at the bottom of the article, you will see the name of the editor that accepted that paper. And that really helps with transparency and conflict of interest. So that happened during this term. You know, we added 2 new committees. So we added a methods committee, we added a teaching committee. And so I would sit and I would evaluate all this and I would see all the work that we were doing. And it was just really just, you know, so much. And I thought when my term started to come up, it was like, we need to catch up. We need to take a second, take a deep breath, and we need to make sure that our ethics, our code of ethics, our practices, what we were doing really met the day in all the changes that we had had. Because ethics is not just an abstract ideal. It is the backbone of everything we do at the Academy of Management, whether we're conducting research, whether we're teaching, whether we're engaging with each other at conferences. You know, ethic behavior builds the trust and credibility that sustain our work. And as I said, with ethics in place, with well-grounded foundational ethics in place, the rest of us can go about doing our work without having to worry about all these things. So it became very important to me. It became very obvious that we needed to do this. Really make sure that our ethics was strong and in place and was meeting the challenges of the day. The second thing that happened to me is on my very first day as Academy of Management president, literally like hours before, the gavel had been passed to me and I was so proud. And I start getting these phone calls and emails. And we had an alleged incident at one of our socials, one of our Academy socials, one of the division socials. And it was a senior male faculty member and a junior female faculty member that were part of this incident. And I do say alleged incident because legally we have to do that and we have no proof. But again, I started getting all these phone calls and 2 things became obvious to me. The first, that we did have good practices in place, that we did have the processes that we needed to do, that we needed to have in place to handle this. But the second thing that became immediately obvious to me was nobody knew about it. Nobody knew what we were doing. And even though we were incredibly responsive, incredibly active, we were really dealing with things that were coming up, nobody knows all the work that goes on behind the scenes. And that's why I thought, even though I had made my decision ahead of time, I knew that ethics was what we were going to have to, that we were going to have to focus on this, and we were going to have to educate the Academy, and we were going to have to make sure that what we were doing, even though our work remains private, but the processes, the ethical frameworks that we have, the safety nets, the security that we can get from all of our ethics work would be known to the Academy members. And so today's webinar is part of that. Let's get all this out. Let's get it out in the public. Let's make sure people know what it is we're doing and how the Academy does it. Because the Academy is more than just a professional organization. It is a global community, and we are committed to advancing management scholarship and practice. And our credibility depends on ethical decision-making at every level. And so with that, I want you to all have a chance to listen to the rest of our speakers, because they are so much more knowledgeable than I am at this and will ever be at this. And I'm deeply appreciative to each and every one of you for being here today. And so I'm going to turn over the podium to Linda Trevino from Penn State University to speak about theory and assessment in ethical organizational cultures. Thank you, Linda, and thank you each and every one of you for being here today.
Thank you, Sharon. So I'm really pleased to be here. I've been thinking about this and developing my ideas about ethical organizational culture since the late 80s. I'm really dating myself. I published this particular model in 1990. And at the time, I was thinking mostly about how it applies to business organizations or not-for-profit organizations. But over the years, I've had the opportunity to see it applied to business schools, as well as to our professional organizations. So I feel very validated in that sense, and I'm looking forward to explaining it to you. So the definition that I offer for what an ethical organizational culture is that it's a slice of the broader organizational culture that affects how employees think and act in ethics-related situations. Excuse me. And it is a combination of, it's a rather complex combination of a set of formal systems and informal systems that either work together or at cross purposes to produce either unethical or ethical, hopefully, behavior. So I'm going to start on the formal side, on the left side of your screen. And I'm starting with executive leadership. And I think what we just heard from Sharon is a great example of the kind of messaging that can come from an executive leader that says, we really care about this matters to us, and sets out expectations for behavior. So we had a great example of that right there. The second formal system is the selection systems, the idea that an organization might or might not care about the integrity of the people that they bring into the system. So, is that part of how they go about hiring or bringing people into the system? We all know about policies and codes. We have a code of conduct at the Academy of Management that we can think about. Business organizations have codes of conduct, etc. The next formal system is orientation and training programs. So these are programs that apply when you bring people in, you onboard them. Is ethics an important part of that? And then on an ongoing basis, is ethics training part of what the organization does to make sure that everybody knows about the ethical behavior that's expected of them? A really important one is performance management systems. So it's very easy, as we all know, to design a performance management system that focuses just on bottom line outcomes, sales or whatever those are, publications. But the more important question from an ethics perspective is, how do we get there, right? Do we get there by doing things ethically, with integrity, honesty, etc. Next is the organization's authority structure. And the idea there is, what kind of place is this? Is this place where you're expected to just do as you're told, whatever that is? Or is it an organization that welcomes questioning of authority, welcomes you to members to ask questions and to report conduct that they think is inappropriate? And finally, decision processes. So are ethical considerations a part of those decision processes on a regular basis? So those are the formal systems. On the informal side, I start off with role models. Who are the people that individuals in the organization look up to, and why are they looking up to them? Hopefully, because they are people of integrity who do things the right way. And then what are the norms of everyday behavior? So not what we say you should do, but what people actually do in the day-to-day of the organization. Rituals you might think of, who do we celebrate when we get together? Is it the top salesperson, no matter how they get the sales, or is it the person who did something extraordinary from an ethics perspective? And what are the stories that people in the organization tell about themselves, their organization? If they were explaining it to someone else, what kind of an organization is this? Do they have stories that speak to the ethics of the organization? And finally, what is the language that's sort of acceptable in the organization? Is ethics a part of the conversation? You see the line that goes between the two boxes on the bottom, and that is brings to mind the question of the alignment between the formal systems and the informal systems. So, for example, if we have a code of conduct and an annual ethics training program, but the norms of daily behavior don't align with what we're being told by the code and the training program, that suggests that members of the organization are getting mixed messages, and they're probably going to go with what they see and hear from the informal system. Let me just say, too, I forgot to mention that my original ideas about culture in an organization, I was building on ideas of others, people like Shine and Deal and Kennedy. So I want to give a shout out to them. All right, I think we can move on to the next slide. So it's really, really important, if you're trying to create an ethical organizational culture, to assess how you're doing on a regular basis. And that assessment can be conducted by someone on the inside of the organization, as long as that person is really trusted. So, for example, if it is a survey, the next bullet point, then, if that survey is sent by someone in the organization who doesn't have the trust, then people aren't going to be comfortable filling it out, or filling it out honestly. So in that case, you might want to bring in an outside organization to conduct the assessment. But you can survey employees, you can survey organizational members, but you can also survey other important stakeholders of the organization. The survey, if you're doing surveys, needs to be substantive. So I've seen organizations say they're surveying about ethics, but on their annual survey of employees, they might have a question or two, and that's not going to tell you very much. If you really want to know what's going on, you need to ask questions. What do employees know about the ethical organizational culture? What are their attitudes towards it? There are all kinds of questions that are important to ask. Do they think that they're being treated fairly, which is really important. You can also conduct focus groups. Again, if trust is high enough, and it's really important to think about, who's the trusted person or persons who should conduct that. You can also collect more objective data. So if this were a business, for example, or a university, you might look at calls to a helpline or a hotline, and what is the content of those calls, and how many of those calls. Some of that is actually difficult to interpret, because if you're getting more calls, is that because you're getting the word out, as Sharon was talking about, or is it because you actually have more problems? So there's nuance to this. And then organizations can also look for other sources of information that might tell them something about their culture. And in a business organization, that might be Glassdoor or other online sources. And the final slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are a few more things that I just wanted to mention. And one is that, in my view, and I've been through this process in a number of organizations, it is so important that the organization is willing to commit resources to the creation and sustenance of an ethical organizational culture. And part of that is that the concern for an ethical culture and how you keep it alive has to be somebody's job, because it's really not easy. In my experience, it's not easy. It involves communicating with all kinds of people inside and outside the organization, regular communication and messaging, creation of rituals that people can feel a part of, designing and administering those assessments I was talking about, making sure that people get communication about the results of those assessments so they feel like their participation in the assessment was worth their while. And an example from the business school, Penn State's Business School, Smeal College, is investing resources in impediments to cheating, or I would say, I should be talking about the university as a whole here. Technological or otherwise would say, we mean it when we say that cheating is not acceptable, right? Are we willing to invest the resources in that? And some of this is from my experience in the business school. So, how, and the university, how easy is it to report violations for faculty and for students? Is there a way to empower reporters? And this would apply in any kind of organization. Do they feel safe reporting misconduct that they observe? Transparency about what's happening, so regular reporting about violations and actions taken. And finally, probably most importantly, is relentless attention. So you really, if you care about having an ethical organizational culture, you just can't let up. You've got to keep at it. And unfortunately, if you don't, I have seen the unraveling of successful ethical cultures in the past. You're going to hear a little bit more now about what we've done in the Smeal College of Business from my colleague and friend, Jennifer Ury.
Thank you so much, Linda, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I am going to build on Linda's comments and specifically her framework here by bringing into life an example of how we have applied this framework here at the Penn State Smeal College of Business. Much of what I will share with you today is also highlighted in a paper that's also published in the Journal of Management Education, where we talk about building a culture of honor and integrity in a business school. So to get started, I should also preface the fact that at the time of writing the paper, I was also moving into the position of, or maybe just moving out of the position of Honor and Integrity Director at the Smeal College of Business. So you can sort of relate that to like a chief ethics officer at a company, for example. So I was very much focused on thinking about our culture. And so to give you a bit of background, this isn't something that just happened overnight. At one point, in about 2006, our board of visitors, so this is the advisory board to our dean, was really expressing concern and a real interest in wanting to prepare our students for the high ethical standards of what they would experience in the professional workplace. So they were sort of tossing around the idea of an honor code of sorts. At that time, we also had a new dean coming on board. And so the board of visitors was using that as a time to say, look, this is something that we really should take on. Separately, our MBA students were having a conversation similarly about wanting to sort of find a mechanism to hold each other accountable to what happens inside the classroom and outside the classroom in terms of professionalism. So at about that same time, our MBA students decided to put pen to paper and crafted their very own Smeal Honor Code. And that honor code was launched in 2006 and a year later was adopted by the larger Smeal community. And so the Smeal Honor Code that exists today was student driven. We have continued to move our efforts forward in this space, really expanding our efforts beyond simply students and faculty and matters related to academic integrity to include many more important stakeholder groups that I'll share with you in just a few minutes. After the honor code was established and about that same time, the dean at the time appointed a position to focus on this. And that position was titled the Leadership Integrity Director. And that individual was very focused on helping to promote academic integrity and professionalism with our students and, of course, with our faculty support. Again, that individual later left the college, and there was this gap. And as Linda shared, this is something that needs constant love and attention. And a new dean came on, and with Linda's leadership, really said, look, we really need someone, again, to be focusing on our culture, our honor and integrity efforts. And so I had the great pleasure of moving into that role as the honor and integrity director. And at that time decided to say, look, we need to move beyond simply students and faculty to also engage others in the conversation. So that included our staff, our alumni, and our recruiters. And still to this day, I am so pleased to report that our commitment to honor and integrity continues to evolve, not without its challenges, and I'll share some of those in a few minutes, but it is something that we remain committed to the point that we now have a center dedicated to ethics as well within the College of Business. So if we can move to the next slide, please. I'll share with you here an example of this stakeholder map, just highlighting the fact that there are so many moving pieces and so many people involved when we talk about culture in order to keep it alive and well. And so, of course, we have our faculty and our students as it relates to the classroom. We have our staff, our administration. We also have a number of other groups. So our board of visitors and our alumni society board, for example, recruiters, and the messages that they share back with us about what they're seeing from our students and also what our students are seeing and hearing from our recruiters. Our alumni serve in a similar fashion. And of course, the larger university where we have our Penn State values and an ongoing commitment to academic integrity. Next slide, please. I'd like to share some examples of what this really looks like at the Smeal College of Business. So when I was serving as the Honor and Integrity Director, again, this is where these examples are coming from. There are others that have surfaced more today. The dean really does set the tone at the top. So that involves any messaging that the dean may give to alumni communities, to student groups, as well as to our faculty and staff. We also have had on our graduate application a question about what does it mean to demonstrate ethical leadership, for example. So we're asking about this at the onset, similar to what you would do in a company, for example, during the interviewing process. Of course, we have our honor code that I have talked about before. We have various orientation programs like many of you do when you welcome new students to campus and into your different programs online and in person. We make sure that our conversation around our honor code and our commitment to honor and integrity is a part of that orientation process. We also have, as part of our evaluation feedback loop, so students can evaluate and give feedback to faculty on their class experiences, we include questions about the faculty members' commitment to academic integrity within that question set. We also have a university hotline that we encourage our students, our faculty, and staff to tap into to raise questions and concerns. And we also have our Dean is In. And this is really a fun way of bringing our senior leadership to our community on a very local level, where the dean will sort of set up shop in our atrium, the lobby of the business building, and really provide anyone, students, faculty, staff, with the opportunity to ask questions, giving real insight into how decisions get made and things that are on their minds. With our new dean, we currently have something called Donuts with the Deans, where we do something very similar, and it's very informal, but also creates those open lines of communication between our administration and our students, for example. That is all on the informal side. On the informal side, we have things like our award programs. So we have an awards program called the Rise Above Award, sort of rising above sort of temptation or, the rest to make those good choices. And those awards are given to faculty and staff and students. We have what we call the first day of class talk. I'm sure many of us have this sort of the first day. Maybe we cover the syllabus, we introduce our course. As part of those introductory remarks, we talk about what it means to be a member of the Semille community, to be a part of something special and having an honor code. We also have a special ritual within the Semille College of Business, where each semester or each year we will sign the honor code. We've had our Nittany Lion mascot down at the honor code signing. We've had our deans all wearing sort of honor code t-shirts and photographing the moment, and everyone's sort of all in with celebrating the fact that we're making this pledge to conduct ourselves with honor and integrity. We also have, again, the very special story that the honor code was really sort of bottom up, grassroots, driven by our students and inspired by our students. And that story lives on. And we also have signage around the building. Now, that's taken different shapes and forms. At the time when I was the Honor and Integrity Director, we had them actually in the bathroom stalls, where we had a captive audience, and we had short ethical dilemmas there, helping our audiences think through some very common matters that they might experience. So again, this really brings the model, that the framework that Linda had shared with you, to life of what this looks like in a business school community. If you could advance to the next slide, please. There are a wide range of mechanisms in place that we have used to really assess how things are going. And that is important. We can do all of these things and say, I guess it's okay, but we really need to take time to stop and reflect. And so the university has facilitated a couple different values and culture surveys that allows us to get to the college level data. We at the Semille College of Business have also conducted surveys to our faculty, staff, students, alumni, and recruiters. We've sort of dug a little bit deeper after those surveys with follow-up focus groups to further understand some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that surfaced in our survey results. We put forth annual disclosure notices that recognizes these are the number of academic integrity violations that we've had. Here's generally how they were handled, and so on, making it very clear that we're holding people accountable. And what I really want to highlight here as an important assessment mechanism that sort of just came about is that I saw in that role increasingly more, and even today, in talking with our and seeing our efforts evolve around honor and integrity, the Honor and Integrity Program Office really has become a resource for students, faculty, and staff to raise questions and concerns. And to me, that's a real testament that you're moving the needle on the culture, that people are willing to come forward and talk about issues. If we could go ahead and advance to the next slide. Thank you. I want to be really clear that this is this is not all, you know, roses and rainbows. It is surely a concerted effort and an ongoing effort. We, like many of you, are in a situation where our primary audience, unlike a typical workplace, we have students who come and go. And so depending on the length of our programs, we do have high turnover. So getting those messages out quickly in a timely fashion really is important. We also know that making any sort of culture change can take time, right? We know research shows 6 to 10 years to change a culture. And so I encourage anyone who's thinking about this in this way to practice patience and just to keep at it. It really does, as Linda emphasized, it takes ongoing care and attention. Linda has a really great metaphor of this idea of tending a garden, right? When you go away on vacation, the weeds are going to continue to grow. And so just like with ethics, we all need to continue to pay attention to it and reinforce the important messages and values that we say we stand for. Thank you so much. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Lundeen.
Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, like Sharon said, across our participants' time zones. Thank you so much. And I'm Kathy Lundeen. Delighted to be here with our participants and our panelists. And my portion today will talk about how ethical and cultural aspects can impact the journal publication process, the assessment of manuscripts, decision-making, all of those kinds of things. So if you could move this slide, thank you, Lucy. This is chapter 2 of my editor's book that you see there on the screen. And these are not all of the ethical issues, of course, in journal publication and manuscript assessment, but they are some examples. So Linda and Jen have already talked very eloquently about those informal and formal aspects of culture. And I want to share where some of the overlap of those aspects can make all the difference in the way authors and reviewers and other journal stakeholders experience the journal publication process. It's the variability across these cultural aspects that is where some of those ethical issues can arise. And so I would like to talk specifically about editorial orientation and training programs, or sort of lack thereof, performance management, some of the decision processes that we make, and norms and language that are associated as ethical cultural markers. And so if you can go ahead one slide. Thank you. So the slides are set up where a few of those ethical issues are in the box, and then the implications of what some of those ethical issues, cultural markers are on that right-hand side. And so editorial orientation and training are usually solely technical in nature. So you take on an EIC role, and here's how you use the manuscript submission and assessment system. Here's how you access production. Here are all the deadlines. So onboarding from the outgoing EIC, which could be a really way of creating some consistency among these processes, that varies a lot, and it's usually embedded within the people, the EICs, rather than a formal system. It varies a lot with respect to the topics you cover between outgoing and incoming, the structure, the time frame. And again, by and large, it tends to be operational in nature. We generally don't discuss the behavioral or ethical expectations about how authors are going to be treated, how editorial processes affect authors, reviewers, ed board members, other stakeholders in that process. And so we take on this EIC role. We come into an ongoing manuscript submission queue. Authors are waiting, and we're a new person in a new environment, and we're going to make mistakes, and those mistakes can really matter. That's the liability of foreignness that you see there, and Lorraine has written a lot about liability of foreignness. We're new, and we're in a new environment. We look around to see, what are other EICs doing? And that's where we can also introduce additional ethical ambiguity. When our work is evaluated, it's generally about metrics. It's generally about outcomes. it's generally not about ethical behavior or ethical impacts of what our processes and decision outcomes look like. The governance boards that run and oversee editors, like some of the associations, there might be publishers boards, the Academy, the AIB, they generally let us do our work. I mean, unless there's a complaint, many times we don't hear from those governance boards. And so the cultural expectations of those boards and associations impact what they assume EICs are doing or what they hope we're doing. But they generally don't talk with us about what those expectations look like in practice. And the lack of transparency that's built into editorial practice has ethical implications. So it's again unusual to have these types of behavioral conversations with the governing boards. I want to talk about decisions about what we accept, decisions about what we don't accept. These are inherently ethical decisions. There is inherent power and information asymmetry in publishing, and that impacts everyone in the publication process. And through our publication decisions, we shape the topics that are raised up in our field. We signal what methodologies are okay. We decide what topics are important. We decide whose names are going to appear in our pages. And because of those publication decisions, they have fundamental ethical impacts and fundamental ethical implications. And another aspect of our decision-making arises from conflicts of interest. Sharon has already talked a little bit about an example of where the Academy is trying to increase transparency through those potential conflicts of interest. Over time, our disciplinary communities get pretty small. You know, we tend to know everyone in our topical or disciplinary orbit. And inevitably, editors have to manage some of those conflicts of interest. So you have a friend or a colleague who submits a paper. What are you going to do about that? And you get maybe a paper to review. You're pretty sure you know whose work this is. And so what will you do with that? And journals have conflict of interest policies, but it's really culture that ultimately impacts how those policies are enacted. And I want to talk about the norms and language together. If you could advance that slide, please. Thank you. It's culture that really impacts process norms, meaning what's happening when a manuscript goes through the assessment process. For example, do we communicate during that process? How do we communicate? Would we, for example, communicate with an author if reviews are going to come in late or something was wrong with a reviewer and they had to drop out or something? So it's culture too that impacts the language we use when we're communicating with authors and shares with them what's happening during that publication process. All of that affects authors' experiences. And through decisions like whether or not each manuscript goes through plagiarism screening, where we put our outreach resources and priorities. So example, do we do some outreach on underrepresented populations, underrepresented authors? Do we go geographically underrepresented? Where do we put those resources and priorities? And also, do the decisions that we make, are they a developmental focus? Are they really primarily a summative focus? All of those affect authors' experiences and impact how they experience this process and their extension of cultural norms and expectations. The language we use certainly has an ethical component. And again, Linda has talked about this with her model. Maybe people on the webinar have experienced getting a manuscript decision letter with really global, overarching assessment language on there. It will say some pretty biting comments, some potentially negative things about the future of the manuscript or the future of the project. It's easy sometimes to forget that email is a very flat medium. if we don't pay attention to that language that we use when we're making decisions and when we're communicating with authors, that can be really harsh. It can be really debilitating for authors and do some real damage if we're not careful. And thankfully, there is way more attention to these ethical aspects. It's not just technical, it's not just operational in the workload that EICs take on. We're paying much more attention across journals, across editors, to some of these cultural aspects and how they impact the experiences that journal stakeholders have when they're submitting their work. That's a very vulnerable thing to do. And there's increasingly ethical recognition that we have some responsibilities around that. And I want to end with some recognition of some of our panelists and what they've been doing in the work in ethical organizational cultures. They can't work at cross purposes. We've heard a lot already about the fact that formal, informal, and how we action those aspects of organizational culture really have to be integrative, and they have to be mutually supporting. For example, you can't espouse a value, for example, of broad author representation and inclusion, and then primarily only make decisions that include, North American authors. And so we have to have those things working together. And like Jen just said, maintaining that organizational culture that you want, you have to be very intentional and really vet it out at regular times to make sure it's doing what you want it to do. I'm thrilled that we are prioritizing these conversations. I'm thrilled to have the Academy and AIB sponsor us today. And so Lorraine Eden, my dear friend and co-author and collaborator, is next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. This webinar, I just want to go back to the theme of the webinar, was on ethical organizational cultures in 3 domains. First, we talked about our journals, which Kathy has just talked about now. We talked about our business schools, which Jen has talked about. And I'm going to bring it back to where Sharon was at the beginning here in talking about our academic association. She has discussed ethics from the point of view of the Academy of Management. I want to bring it to the Academy of International Business. And all of us are building off Linda Trevino's work, which is the foundation. And I think if I'm doing the data right, it's now, is it 35 years? Are we celebrating an anniversary, Linda? I believe we're celebrating an anniversary on this literature on ethical organizational cultures. So just a shout out to Linda for starting us on this important journey. Academy of Management and AIB are academic associations. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, we all belong to those. I belong to a variety of them, and I suspect you do too, 6 or 7 associations. It's an interesting thing to think about ethical organizational cultures, though, in terms of our academic associations. Most of the work that has been done on EOCs has been done primarily in for-profit domestic businesses. And you've listened to both Linda and Jen talk about the work that goes into doing qualitative assessments, what's called an EOC audit, of doing an EOC audit of an organization's ethical culture, and how much time is involved in detail and about the building of all of this. So my interest in this was to think about, can we use insights from the ethical organizational culture literature to think about our academic associations, about AOM and AIB? We have ethics codes. We have an ethics review committee, an ethics policy committee. You saw Sharon's slides at the beginning showing the apparatus that we have in place. What prompted my original piece that I wrote on this was a question when someone asked me about, can you tell me a little bit about the history of AIB's ethics codes? And I think I was the first drafter of all 4 of AIB's ethics codes. And so I was interested in sort of talking a little bit about the history of this. And the question I got asked was the one we all get asked as researchers, which is, so what?
you know, you've got the ethics code in place. How do you know whether it's mere just window dressing or it actually does matter? And what's very evident from Linda and Jen's work on this is qualitative assessments can be very helpful in thinking about this. And you listen to Jen talk about all the work at Schmiel in terms of assessing on a regular basis and having someone who is ahead at the top on here. And as far as I know, I don't know any academic association that has had this kind of an in-depth qualitative assessment of the health or strength or weaknesses of its ethical organizational culture. And I certainly wasn't prepared to do it, but having lived through most of it, I understood there was a qualitative technique that we don't use all that much called ethnography, autoethnography, where someone who was involved going all the way through this can look at the lens through the lens of their personal experience, can engage in self-reflection of that history, and then apply some analysis to it. And it occurred to me, you saw, and could I have the next slide, please? You saw Linda's and Jan's discussion of the formal and informal components of an ethical culture and how an EOC is a slice of the organization's culture with respect to ethics and the behavior of the individuals. And I asked myself the question, could you look at the Academy of International Business as an academic association, a nonprofit association that brings together scholars and researchers and professors and PhD students around thinking about research, teaching, and service in our academic associations, and use the framework of this model to think about the strength or health of the Academy of International Business as an academic association. Next slide, please. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And so what I actually did, and this is a paper published in the Journal of International Business Policy a few months ago. I took the formal and informal components and actually went through and looked and tried to do an assessment of where the Academy of International Business was here. And my overall assessment, and I'm going to sum it up fairly clearly, is that we have the formal components in place. And they're easier to see, of course, the formal components in place, the informal ones a little bit less so. Could I have the next slides, please? And, you know, you're welcome to read the paper for the details. I don't really want to go through it. What became very evident to me in looking at AIB's history, and I suspect this is true in many academic associations, that the original impetus for thinking about ethics in an academic association comes through the journals. The journals are the first place where you have, as you listen to Kathy talk about, you have journal editors, papers are coming across the transom. We don't know whether or not they were complied with research ethics and research integrity norms of behavior or not. We often have a code of ethics in place. And that development of an ethics code in an academic association, most of which are publishers of our scholarly journals, and where we ourselves publish and we need editors, that we may be in effect, the guardians at the gate for academic associations in building an ethical culture. It also became very clear for me from looking at the history of AIB's development of an ethical organizational cultures, and you heard this from all the speakers, tone at the top matters, leadership matters here. And in academic associations, we have a really kind of interesting group of leaders when you think about it. We don't have a lot of employees, but very, very few employees in Academy of Management or at AIB, and they tend to be at the secretariat or the headquarters. We have an enormous number of volunteers on all sides, and they serve on executive boards. They become fellows if the association has fellows. You have leaders of chapters, you have divisions, you have special interest groups. So there are lots of people performing volunteer leadership roles inside our association. Right? They have the members that are the few that are the employees, and then all of the participants in attendance. So everybody watching this webinar now is a member of at least one, and I expect of many academic associations. Next slide, please. So this is the one I want to spend a little bit of time on, and that is the practical policy implications of doing an autoethnographic study. Now, I truly believe the appropriate way to do this is what Linda and Jen talked about, which is a qualitative deep dive assessment into the overall health of the ethical organizational culture. Very expensive, very time consuming. I'm delighted that Schmiel does it. I would actually argue, I think Texas A&M does a pretty good job of this too, going back all the way to its original honors code. So I think also you see this in the Mays Business School. But our academic associations, I think partly because we're so staffed by volunteers, we have to think about who's doing what in terms of building an ethical organizational culture. And my insights coming from looking at AIB, as I said, journal editors, I think, are very much the ethical guardians, because as academic associations, we are primarily about contributing to scholarship, and people won't believe us unless we have ethics in place. An in-house ethics code of ethics, I think, gets buy-in from all the members and is very clear. Is more than just checking the box, for example, when you submit a paper. I also think it's important for the journal editors to be very much involved with the publishers, because often publishers have a lot more resources than we do and are further ahead, for example, in terms of thinking about AI than an individual journal editor can do. And most journals now are members of COPE. This is the Committee on Publication Ethics, which has been around a long time, originally started with science and medical journals, but has been very good at developing standards that go across all of our journals. I think it's also critically important to have journals where the editors get together on common panels. I spoke as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Business Studies regularly at AOM panels. And AOM journals speak regularly at AIB panels. And I think speaking with one voice about the importance of ethics across our journals is a very powerful way to influence research. I think it's also very important for journal editors to have two-way conversations with their members, to regularly have those kinds of discussions at PDWs and consortium, and the Ethics Education Committee at AOM and the Ethics Policy Committee at AIB. Those are the important roles, that two-way conversations that these two entities foster, I think, are critically important. And I want to give a shout out for managing editors. Managing editors come first and papers coming in, and a strong ethical managing editor, I think, is extraordinarily important here. And then a commitment to best practices. And I think the best practices come from circulating so that we each understand what are going on. This is very clearly happening in AI now, thinking about best ethical practices from a journal, from the authors submitting, from the reviewers, and from the journal editors. Circulating best practices, particularly in a fast-moving technological thing like AI, is critically important. Let me go to the leaders. I think leaders of an association and leaders of an academic association to commit to fostering an ethics culture. I think this is very important. Ethical leadership starts at the top. And the managing director of any academic association, whether it's the International Studies Association or EBA or AIB or AOM, the managing directors at the top matter because they then can be active here. Now, you listen to Jen talk. One of the first things Jen said is her first role at Schmiel was as a chief ethics officer. I don't think most business schools have chief ethics officers, and I don't think most associations do either. But I think that role Jen played and her description of that role was
Lorraine, we have problems to hear you.
Oh, you have, is it any better now?
Now it's better, yeah. Perhaps you
right,
can
I will
repeat
speak
the
closer
last
to
two
the
or three
mic.
sentences, please.
All right, let me just say I was talking about Jen's role at Schmiel, where she mentioned first she was chief ethical officer, and how important that role is, because tasking one person association means someone is actively thinking about this and has the opportunity to report on it.
Lorraine, we have the problem that you freeze all the time.
I am sorry, I'm not sure what to say here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Perhaps you
Well,
can
let me
turn
turn
off
my
the
video
camera.
off. I'm going to turn off my video and just
Yes,
talk. Is
that's
that
what I
better?
just, yeah, that's
I
better.
will be honest, we have a whole family visiting us here on school break from Ohio. So there are six people in this house, probably all using the internet at the same time. Oh dear, I'm sorry. Anyway, lastly, let me say ethics should be an ongoing conversation. And I do think it is important, as Jen talked about, to do audits, whether they are the kind that I did for AIB or actually doing the full qualitative audit that has been done, for example, at Schmiel. And let me stop there, and I will pass this back over to Sabile, who I think is going to bring us back full circle. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, and all the other speakers. So I would like to give the opportunity for questions from the participants. Is anybody ready at the moment to share a question with us? If not, I would like to ask Linda, which is more important for a strong ethical organization culture, the strong formal systems or the strong informal systems, and why?
So it's like asking me to choose my favorite child.
Yes, I do.
It's really, really difficult to answer this question because the model suggests that they're both really important and that they really need to work together. And it depends somewhat, I think, on the kind of organization it is and the size of that organization. So, for example, if it's a really large bureaucratic organization, then you're going to need to have some of these formal systems in place. I'm not sure that you can really be effective with just the informal. On the other hand, if it's a smaller organization, it doesn't make sense to have a lot of these formal systems in place. So it depends somewhat on, things like the size of the organization. But what I am inclined to say is that there are certain systems that are more important than others within, right? So we've talked a lot about leadership here on the webinar. And I think without strong leadership from the top, but also at all levels through the organization. So people in leadership positions who really buy in and then communicate how important ethical conduct is and then hold people accountable. That's just absolutely essential. And then if I had to choose another system that I think is really important, it would be the performance evaluation system, because we know that people pay a lot of attention to what's rewarded and what they might get disciplined for. And if the system that the organization has focuses on respectful behavior and honest and ethical behavior, and that it's the way you do things that matters, and you don't get ahead in this organization unless you're that kind of a person and that kind of a leader. I think those are really, really important. The others also, obviously, I think they're all important, but if I had to pick a couple of systems, that's what I would choose.
Thank you so much, Linda. I have a question from my co-chair, Rachel, and she is asking about the very dynamic times, and there is a problem with true and fact in the meantime. So Meta is getting rid of auto fact checking on posts. Perhaps we can see here how the formal and the informal systems are impacting the culture. So I would like to address Jen in us answering these questions. You said ethics doesn't never sleep. What would you say about the ongoing examples? What would be your recommendations?
Sure. I mean, the reality is that there always have been, there are, and there always will be ethical challenges. And I think that's, that's one of the key reasons why organizations need to be paying attention to these matters on a regular basis. It's not like it's simply an agenda item that you look at once a week. It really should be a part of the organization's fabric in terms of how organizations bring people into the organization, how people reward and train, reward, how they make decisions, just in every part of business. We need to be thinking about what are the ethical implications of this decision? Who are the various stakeholders and their various needs and interests that need to be considered? We can bring in some of the ethical frameworks that we teach in our classes, right? In terms of how we think about some of these challenges. But the key is that the leadership needs to be paying attention to these things. And to Linda's point just a moment ago, it really needs to be something that needs to be thought about at all levels of the organization. So at the employee level, at the middle manager level, and at the executive leadership level. And so these challenges will not go away. They will exist because we are humans, and right, people make mistakes, not always make the right choices. And I think as leaders in our organizations, it's important for us to help and support organizations moving forward in congruence with what they stand for, what they say is important to them as their values. So I'm not solving the world's problems today, but I will say
a little part of it.
Yeah, if we all make a concerted effort, I think we can move the needle. That's
great, so much. Sharon, please.
Thank you. And thank you for that question to Rachel. We're living in a time right now when there's a lot of change going on, right? Our institutions are changing and we're all questioning what is ethics? Do we all get to adopt our own ethics? There's just a lot of change going on in the world around us. And, to Lorraine's point, this is the time when organizations such as AOM, such as AIB, such as AACSB, such as SM, right? I can go on and on and on, but this is the time for those organizations, for our organizations to really say, let's be clear on what ethical behavior is. This is the time for the people that lead in those organizations and the small and mighty teams like this mighty team, in those organizations to take a stand, because the world is looking at us for leadership in this area. And in a world where leadership right now is, again, maybe in flux, maybe the values are a little different. I mean, I don't want to make a statement, but we are undergoing a lot of change. The world is looking to us. I always say, academics, we are the ambassadors of the world. We don't care. We go where we're needed. We do research where it's important, and we're largely, you know, color and gender blind in many ways, right? We really strive to do the right thing, and the right thing needs to be guided. And this is where our organizations today, more than ever, our organizations are so important, our professional organizations. And so I think that's a great question, and I think it is up to us to respond. It is up to us to stand up to those, you know, to stand for our values.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for this addition. And is there any other question from the participants? So I don't see one at the moment. Lorraine.
I
Please.
hope you'll be able to hear me. We'll see. Several years ago, Kathy Lundeen and Paul Valler and I wrote a book called The Ethical Professor, and it came out of our blogging on the Academy of Management blog, The Ethicist. What I think became very important to us when I think about that book now and look back on it, it was written from the point of view of the individual. And it was very focused on doctoral students and junior faculty who were coming into the academia world, into a brand new environment, and didn't have a really good sense of the ethical norms, of the slice that Linda talks about how things are done here. And what was very important, I think, in coming out of that was that these young people, our new entrants, were susceptible to all kinds of pitfalls, ethical pitfalls from the unwary. And one of the chapters in that book is 20 pitfalls, right? It's just 20 little case studies, all of which happened in one shape or another that were ethical pitfalls. What I learned and I thought from this, and I wanted to just sort of share this, I wonder if from academic associations' point of views, you can put those codes up, right? You can have those formal things set, the Ethics Policy Committee, the Ethics Review Committee, the Ombudsman and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's the soft getting together, having those discussions, you know, the role of the Ethics Education Committee and running, you know, PDWs and consortium where you're talking to young people starting out, getting in here. They want to know, they have questions. And I remember Kathy telling me once, we have never had an ethics webinar that wasn't packed because people want to talk about these things. They're really interested in these issues. So I wonder if in academic associations, particularly global ones, you know, like 30% of AIB are in the United States and Canada, only 30%, I mean, 70% are outside of North America. So I'm curious if whether in academic associations, it is really important to do the soft stuff. It's just my question. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Cassie is raising the hand.
I think I'll hopefully respond a little bit or add to what Lorraine is saying. I do think there's a huge amount of momentum now, and I think that's right. I mean, obviously, Lorraine and I were collaborators, and we think very similarly about the role of the interpersonal interactions and allowing a place where people can ask questions without feeling dumb or without feeling like they're going to get shut down or like everybody else knows the answer to this. Last year, going through all of being an EEC representative in all of those consortia. So one of Sharon's initiatives was that each of the consortia had at least an hour of ethics discussion. And honestly, we were like, oh, you know, how welcome are we going to be? Because it was this top down, you will do this. And there wasn't one session that I was involved in, and we talked about it also as a committee. There wasn't one where we not only didn't go full time, but we went overtime. And it wasn't just the New Doctoral Student Consortium. I was also, I think with Rachel too, we went to like the entrepreneurship division, the senior, there was a late career consortium, and we were speaking in there, and even they had lots of comments about the state of ethics. What does it look like in practice? How do we norm people? What questions do we have? And so I think, you know, to Lorraine's point, and what the EEC is trying to do is create that space where we can have conversations and get a sense of what other people are thinking and what is the right thing to do. What are the expectations? People want to know what those are. And I'm thrilled that we're going to continue to do that in Copenhagen.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I just can confirm it was really very wonderful to see these young people. And we always ask the questions, why should ethics matter in your profession? And they have been full of questions and contributions. It was wonderful. So I would like to start a topic that it's also very demanding. So can anybody answer to how you think that AI might affect the ethical organizational culture, for instance, in our journals or also in our business schools? Who would like to give the first answer?
Oh, I'll start. And this is a huge topic. Matter of fact, I agreed to be on a panel for the, we have an interest group, a digital interest group at AIB now, and it's running a series of workshops, and one of them is the beginning of June. And it's a panel on journal ethics and what AI is doing. So I have to think about what I'm going to say. I haven't got there yet. But clearly this is a huge issue. Matters in terms of even, you know, what methods are acceptable methods. What happens if you get a paper that, you know, come in where part of it was written by AI. And the one that I understand is really a problem now, and maybe some of you can speak to this, is people who have been asked to do journal reviews just go out and have AI write the review. That's one of the things I think is becoming most, and there's some research on that showing that AI tends to use words. My sort of sense is that use use AI cautiously and don't believe anything it says. And a good way to sort of test that is to ask it to write a bio for you off the internet. I discovered that I was born and raised in England. Nope. You know, so I mean, my point in saying this is these are very new technologies. They are affecting everything, our students and our teaching, our research, all the way down to all AI and the various types, generative AI, you know, the, so let me just stop there and say that I think that, I make one more point. Our publishers are further along than we are in thinking about this. And I think having those kinds of dialogues with our scholarly publishers about how we should think about that, what policies we put in place. The other thing I should tell you is one of the areas I do research is intellectual property rights, IPR. And so, for example, there was a judge last week that just declared that AI could not have intellectual property rights. It had to actually be a real person to have IPR rights on here. So I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much. So it's a huge topic and it will impact us a lot. Is anybody else who wants to make a statement on AI? If not, I can tell you at the Academy of Management, we will have an ethic forum on this topic again. So we will have the possibility to discuss that there. So one thing that's perhaps for Kathy, it's about, you mentioned power asymmetry and toxic language. How can they affect the ethical organization culture? What are your experiences?
Thanks. Yep. Going back to something Lorraine said in her portion about talking together as editors. Mainly, well, I'll use the example in the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning in our discipline. We would get together as a group of EICs and really talk through what have been the experiences of authors. How do we know? Let's take a look at our decision letter templates because it's all within the system. And when I was talking before, it seems like that would be something you don't visit very frequently. These are email templates. They can be very difficult to access depending on the manuscript system. And unless we are mindfully looking through, what does that language look like? Does it offer any hope? Even if it's a desk reject, what does the language sound like in the language of assessment? So we talk together as a community. How can we change that experience in terms of language and in terms of helping people understand? We're reviewers too. It's about the manuscript, but you also have to pay attention to the tone of what you're saying, because authors can't use any kind of technical information or any kind of suggestions on the topic itself if the language is so disruptive, they can't engage with it. And one last thing I would say is that it became very clear very quickly as an editor that people conflate themselves with their manuscripts. And so people use language like, well, I was rejected from JME or AMJ. And when we did road shows, when we went out and did manuscript development sessions, and when we did author engagements, we tried to really help people decouple themselves from their work and not feel so holistically assessed. And so just things like that, helping people develop a frame for considering where does their work sit within the whole universe of sort of who they are, and how can we develop resilience among authors and train our reviewers to be mindful of both the tone and the content, because that tone can be very, very difficult. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other contribution to that? Because power imbalance, I think that's anything we heard, especially in these PhD sessions. This is really an issue.
I think too, Sybil, the communication piece can help with the power imbalance. And when people submit their papers, it's just this black hole of a manuscript system. And all of us editors have heard horror stories from authors that they hear nothing for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, or a paper goes out, R3, R4, and then the paper gets rejected. And so thinking about how do decisions get made? What is the timing for decisions? What's ethical in terms of stringing people along? And how many rounds do you go where the paper is actually being improved? Or is it just this incrementalism, and it's out way too long with, a rejection decision sort of hanging over people's head? So I think being mindful of the number of rounds you're willing to go, and I'm hearing way more from editors that the journals are creating, if not formal, informal policies about how many rounds they'll go out, but also communicating with authors to help them know where is my paper, because these are really consequential decisions, and we have a lot of control over that.
Thank you so much. I think that was a very important input. I would like to thank you for all your significant inputs of your lectures and also now of the discussion. I think we could see how much ethics matter in academy, how already raised by Sharon Alvarez. And we could see that we need an integrative nature of the formal and informal systems, that we have this gardening of the organizational culture in the business schools. Also how the culture shapes practices to bridge the formal and informal systems in publication. We just had a notion by the last discussion, and we could see these virtual cycles of the ethical organization of academy associations by journals, leaders, and members. I thank everybody for being part of this session, and I hope we can do that again. And as you heard, at the Academy of International Business, there is a possibility to have this discussion also with the speakers, and we will do also education forums at the Academy of Management. Thank you so much, and have a lovely, for me, afternoon or evening or whatever it will be. Bye-bye.